I was understanding going beyond the cognitive neuroscience into the heart's intelligence and understanding more about nervous system regulation and also how the neurochemistry and everything. I was kind of going on a deeper um, sort of journey and realizing that, for us to get into flow, lights on is really important. But for us to really grow, lights off is really important. So I had moved from thinking we want to get as many children into lights on as possible to realizing the importance of being lights off, that actually that's where the hidden potential hangs out. And then the exponential potential hangs out in radiance. So I was beginning to understand our human potential and our soul potential on a much greater level.
Julia Black, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you on this beautiful summer's day?
I am here in rural England in Somerset near Glastonbury. And I'm feeling really good. Yes, in my on my own in my own semantics, I'm definitely feeling radiance today.
Excellent. And as we will get to later, you do you still check in daily of how you're feeling on your scale? Oh,
Yes,
interesting.
yes, absolutely. And not just daily. Sometimes it's moment to moment, right? So
Right.
it's that constant sort of like, oh, just felt something shift there.
Right.
Where has that taken me?
Oh, interesting. We'll definitely get to that. All right. So lights on learning. Tell us a little bit about how that came into being, because it does seem to me one of a really, really good, very inspiring spectrum of ideas, and that it is applicable to everyone, whether they're a parent or a young person or anyone trying to navigate this world as we head into the great transition, is the kindest way we could put it. Transformation, shifting from one way of being to another, and definitely how we approach that, where we are on your scale, feels really important. So tell us how it came into being.
So I would have to go back probably about 17 or 18 years, which is when I really began this journey into what I call being an accidental educationalist, someone obsessed with human flourishing, and really kind of on a quest, I guess, not only to unlock and answer the questions I had in my own life since a child, like why am I here and what's the bigger reason and the bigger purpose, but also how to keep my children's passion and love for learning alive. So it really started back when my daughter was 3 and 4, and um, she was a very hungry learner, curious, an early speaker. And when she started school at age 4, as we do here in the UK, she was a summer born, so she's just 4. I began to notice a real difference. And she began to get frustrated and angry. And because she was so articulate, she would also talk about how bored she was sitting on the carpet, sort of having to go, ah, 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 bah, 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 sort of reciting the phonics. Um, but what really concerned me then was more the change in her demeanor that I saw. And also, again, as we'll discover on this conversation, like the semantics of starting to see her own light go out. And I remember thinking, well, this isn't going to work. So what can I do to enhance and enrich her journey through education? And it all really began with a phone call to the local education authority where I was asking, could I sort of have her staggered learning continued so that she
Can
just
you
went
tell us
part
what
term?
staggered learning is?
Yeah,
Okay.
so when they start in reception school, they kind of ease them in a little bit. So they might do mornings, just 3 days a week, or afternoons, or then they might ease into whole days. And that took in this school about 6 weeks. But it was when she went full time that I noticed the real difference. And so I just phoned up and said, look, is there any way I can continue this sort of, part-time arrangement to have her not in school full time? Expecting the person on the end of the phone, who I have given a name to, I call him Simon, just because it was such an important conversation, as it turns out. And I was expecting him to say no. And he said, yes, it's called Flexi schooling. And I was like, oh. And he said, you just need to get the permission from the head teacher. And that really, so which I did, and she said, "Oh, I haven't heard of that." So I had to put a proposal together, and she did a bit of asking around as well. But here in the UK, it's a legal right for us to be able to share the education with our schools, which I'm a huge proponent of. And that's really what we did. So that was, she's now 22, just 22. But that kept me very, very much involved with her as a learner and then also with my son. But it also got me really involved in the school too, because I began to think, well, if it's my daughter's feeling this, chances are there's a lot of children
She's not
feeling
on
this.
her own.
Yeah,
And there's a
she's not on her
lovely
own.
story right at the beginning of your book about her running towards a road, and people are shouting at her to stop, and she just turns around and smiles at them and keeps running, which I have to say reminds me a lot of young dogs. So that they get to that stage where they've been coming to you when you offer the cue, and now they just go, no, bye, I'm off. Much more exciting things happening there. And the teacher said, I think she's bored. And that also, well done, that teacher who recognized that this was a symptom of an underlying energetic thing rather than she's just decided to ignore us, which we put on people, kids, dogs, everything.
Yeah, and it stayed with me because exactly that. It could have taken a turn to her becoming labeled as a naughty, defiant child, which, as I say in the book, my dad was definitely the naughtiest boy in his school when he was growing up. Um, but it didn't. She really understood that here was a child that was wanting to run and skip and hop her way through learning. And so I look back at that and really grateful to Claire for giving me that gift as a parent to
Right.
realizing actually when we take our lead from the children with where they are with their learning, they do flourish. They want to learn. They run and they can take full ownership of it, even as young, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And in fact, the younger they are, the more ownership they normally take until they learn, otherwise. But yes, that was a really important moment, which also then helped me realize when she went into school the teachers didn't see that. Now there
Right.
was this set path which she had to follow, even though she was already, 10 meters down the road, for example.
Right. And I'm curious, before we continue to look at the path, she's just 22, summer child, and now she's a summer young adult with her prefrontal cortex developing. How does she view her education looking back?
She's in her final year now at university. She's at University of Leeds doing natural sciences. She is the most phenomenal learner. Both my children are phenomenal learners. And what I mean by that is they take full ownership of where they're heading. They take full ownership of the work that they have to put into achieve, or jump the hurdles as high as they want to jump them. And I think they're both grateful, her and my son are both grateful to the time where I took them out of school when my daughter was 9 and my son was 7, and I had my own creative learning center because they truly were able to explore their what I call their switch, the thing that lights them up, their natural gifts that they've been given, and really find their voice to develop who they are. I think they've both got a really strong sense of who they are as human beings. And that so far is carrying them through life. So yes, I think they're both extremely grateful that as a parent I saw a problem but didn't hang around in the playground moaning about it. I went in and started finding solutions for them, but also for the school, and then for my own creative learning center for 15 schools in the local area and for thousands of children that came round, and then later on for families all around the world. And and I feel hugely proud, actually. I feel hugely proud to look at them and say that, yeah, I saw a problem and I set out to find solutions for it rather than go down the sort of the road that's very easy to go down, which is what is wrong with them. Nothing. They're
Yeah,
beautiful human
or the
beings.
education system is broken and we can't fix it because we're only one parent. What can we possibly do? And you're a single parent. You're on your own
Yeah.
trying to fix this. I am genuinely in awe of your capacity to do exactly what you said, and to recognize that finding what we're here for, it feels to me, is part of essential human development that our culture does not give space for. We are still basically given the option that we're here to pay bills until we die, and as long as we slot into the capacity to earn money, to pay the bills, to keep the banks happy, that's our function. And it's not. And everybody knows it's not at a core level. But with the shamanic work and the accidental gods work, we get a lot of adults right up into their late 70s and 80s who are still searching for, what am I here to do? What is my soul's purpose in life? And you're helping people to find that when they are 6. And it doesn't mean it won't evolve, but at least they know that it's a thing. And they have the tools to go and find it. And you got an award from your school for being one of the parent governors who made the most difference. So take us a little bit further along the line. I would really like to know more about the centre that you ran, but let's have a look at how you got there and then what the principles were underpinning it. Over to you.
Yes. So this will take me to I used to be a documentary maker, and I guess I chose motherhood. So it was very apparent for me that as a woman who'd been told I could have it all, and now have become a mother, that I didn't like the way that all looked, because I really felt the pull to be there with my children. And before my children, I'd been making films around young mental well-being for Channel 4 News and things. So I was spending a lot of time with families, with children who were suffering with mental health. And I remember making that decision that actually, no, I don't want my children to be at home with someone else. I want to be with them. But when I let go of that part in me, that creative expression as a filmmaker, I felt I felt this big void. And it was that question, well, who am I now then? Right. So this disparaging view I had, I guess, of just being a mum, who am I now then if I'm no longer a filmmaker? And almost when my daughter started school, I suddenly found a community that I could pour this creative energy in and ignite my creative energy again, really, and bring my kind of director hat into the mix. And I became a parent governor. I found myself chair of the PTA, which was at the time, it's just like I could never have imagined I'd have been there, but I kind of sort of fell into it. And I thought, well, what can I bring into the mix? And I began to think of all the skills and the talents that the school community had within the parent base. We're a small school. I think there were something like 80 families, 106 children. And we decided to put on a circus. The head teacher had said, why don't we hire a circus in and that will be a fundraiser? And I thought, well, why didn't the children become the circus? Because then it's an educational enrichment opportunity rather than just a show that we're going to buy tickets to see. And that's when I think I realized, that would have been back in 2009. That's when I realized the enormous amount of talent and gifts and superpowers that surround our schools that just go untapped. They never make it into the school gate because many PTAs, parent teacher associations, are focused on cake sales or summer fetes. And so I said, right, we're going to do a circus. And I found a parent who had just joined the school who was into drama, juggling, and clowning. So I went to her and said, would you be one of the co-directors with me? And then another parent, so that was Emmeline, and another parent, Liz, came up and said, I used to transform clubs like Ministry of Sound and Cream into these incredible landscapes, from an empty room into an environment, that people would have an experience in. Can I join too? So the three of us kind of came together, and then we mobilized the whole parent base really, and we every single child, 106 children, performed in a 90-minute show in a big top up in the field. And we had boys on motorbikes, we had trapeze, we had clowning, we had a father did learn the unicycle, we had children on stilts.
They must have had so much fun, the adults. I mean, just
It was
learning, hey, I
amazing.
have to learn the unicycle for my kid's school. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. And that tapped into his passion for for
Exactly.
cycling. And what was so incredible about it, I remember sitting sort of backstage after the first show and almost being in awe of like, oh, that little 9-year-old that was asking my dad, like, how will I find my thing? What am I here for? And him telling me, you'll find it. And me being slightly frustrated because I wanted the answer. Here I was at sort of 40 going, I think I know why I'm here.
Right.
I'm here to help people shine. I'm here to help people have the courage to really step into the unknown and put themselves in the spotlight and just feel that sense of awe of who they are.
Right.
And it was phenomenal and it really mobilized the community. And yeah, we won the National Parent Teachers Association Award for
I bet
changing
you did.
the school because it
Because
was
other people
absolutely
don't
phenomenal.
do circuses. I had a question because that was in the book and you were a pink wig, corset, and fake eyelashes. And did it ever happen again or was it a one off?
Yeah, so it happened. So we did two shows for that, and then we got the bug, and people, parents who hadn't been involved, were coming up going, right, what are we going to do next year? So the following year we did a musical. So again, me, Emily, and Liz, we wrote the script, and then we put on this a musical, and we had a big we had a big communal feast as well. So that was the next year. Um, and then we also sort of we did other things. We had like a trash and show, so the parents, their children, and the parents worked together to recycle clothes, and we had this sort of catwalk fashion show. So we did loads of enrichment activities. And I then was beginning to my ambition because I could see how alive the children were coming. So by now I knew all the kids in the school, right? I knew them really well. And I could see the disparity between how we would talk about them in the governor's meeting, almost as numbers and sat levels. So this one's, how are we going to move these up 3 sub levels? And I was kind of like, where's the human in this? Like, who cares, really? Because parents don't really understand what 3.1 means. And if they go up to 3.3, the shift that's happened. And also, we can't really lead people to excel through numbers. It's through passion and it's through the energetic exchange. So I was beginning to get more and more ambitious of how we could weave this educational enrichment into the curriculum. And I think I just became a bit annoying to the governors. But the way I like to think of it is I outgrew them. I became my vision became too big. So then the next year, the next event was called Tree Play, and I took it into the woods, and we basically put these nets up, like sort of to 15 meters high in the trees. And I got some friends of mine who were the natural history filmmakers to come down, and we put on this day for a school, and a different school came along for the day where it was sort of blurring fact and fiction. So we had camera traps set up and we had, cameras on dollies that would track down these tree avenues and all of this amazing kind of real world filmmaking. But we had this beautiful narrative in the mix of an actor saying, right, I know there's this bird in here. There's this dino bird. And so 40 children and their teachers and the head teacher, we spent the day in the woods tracking this dino bird for which we had created um, scents and different markings on trees and scratches on trees. And, we had this massive puppet that was, it was phenomenal. Again, a really nice blur of theatrical expression and immersive experience. And that head teacher, she was a head teacher of an outstanding school. She said this was the most incredible educational experience she'd ever been on. And actually, they used it to fuel the children's learning for 3 weeks following. It was in the maths. Well, what if that dino bird met another dino bird? How soon would there be a sustainable population, for example? And these were children, again, from I think year one, so 4 or 5, through till I think it was year 4 or 5. So sort of from, yeah, 4 or 5 years old to 10 or 11. Um, and again, I just kept getting that affirmation back. You're on the right track. There's something exciting here. And that then led on to an adventure in Canada, family adventure in Canada, where I took the children out of school, and then I saw their learning explode, and with little or no need for me to do very much at all. And that's when I began to think, actually, you know what? I think I can see an alternative way for how we could really encourage children to learn at phenomenal levels. Um, so that's sort of all the sort of the pre-story to me coming home to the UK and setting up my creative learning centre.
Because what I am hearing from you and what I've heard from other places is that the obvious fact that for 300,000 years, schools did not exist and children learned what they needed to know because kids are like sponges and they love learning. I remember a long time ago watching a video of a gentleman in India who set up the school in the cloud, and he just basically put a computer in a wall.
Professor Mitra, yeah.
Yes, yes, or left it under a tree in an Indian village. And it was in English, and the kids taught themselves English. And I remember the second lot taught themselves genetic engineering. And he came back at the end of 2 months and said, "What have you learned?" And they went, "No, we haven't learned anything." And he said, "No, you must have learned something. Tell me something." And this little girl at the back of the class puts her hand up and goes, "All we learned was that improper replication of the DNA molecule leads to disease." That's you taught yourself that on a computer that you didn't even know what a computer was 2 months ago. And he had the pedagogy of the grandmother, and the grandmother's going, "But we don't know anything." He goes, "No, no, you don't need to know anything. You just need to sit there and go, 'That's amazing. I didn't know that when I was your age.'" And the kids will learn because they love learning. And we managed to stick them in schools and crush all of that, which
Yes.
is quite an achievement, frankly, but not useful, and particularly not useful in a world where Google's going to give them every bit of data point they ever need, and what they need to learn is, what am I here for? Where's my spark? And everything that I read in your book, every single child, you were able to help them find the spark of creativity, and they were all creative. Nobody
Yes.
was going, "Well, what I really want to do is learn how to sit and recite verbs. That's going to be a lot of fun." Never, not a single one. So I'm ranting. Tell us a little bit about, yeah, you came back from Canada. Your kids are like, "We don't need school anymore. We are learning fine without that level of indoctrination." Where did you take it from there?
Yeah, so again, as we always know when we're on track because something comes along and says, "Here you go, here's a gift from the universe." The school, old school that had been closed down in my village, came up for sale. And one of my directors who I'd managed to get on board said, "Okay, well, I'm gonna buy that school then." So we have this beautiful, beautiful rural, yeah, exactly, beautiful rural location in Somerset Levels of this perfect building for my creative learning center. And we started with home educating families. And then we began to get parents who had children in school but wanted to use the flexi schooling. So the kids would come to my center for 1 day a week with permission of the school. And then we began to get the schools coming to us as well. And the schools would always come to us and say, "We've got what they would call the bottom 30% of academic achievers, the ones who are kind of struggling or failing or being very, very disruptive. Can you work with them?" And then and we've got the top 5% who, we can't really extend because they're way beyond where we need to go and they're getting bored and possibly disruptive. So we would kind of work with those. And as groups of children, yeah, the two,
Either end of the curve. Yeah.
exactly. And then with one school or maybe a couple of schools, we actually worked with the entire school. So I was now I'd gone from being the home educated mom that was, that parent in the school, bringing in talents, working with 106 kids, to now seeing children come in as learners in volume. Um, and that was really exciting because by now I had kind of locked into an obsession, I guess, about how we learn. I had started already understanding like neuroscience and that actually learning, is neurons and the synaptic sort of, gap between the two neurons and how we create those neural pathways. So I'd kind of started looking at the neurobiology of it. And also just that learning actually is making mistakes. That's how we learn. But the sort of the what happens in schools is there's a right way. So children learn, oh, we don't get it wrong if we want to get it right. And I guess when they came to my center, it's like I would say, I would say like, we're I'm going to expect you to like make a lot of mistakes, and they would kind of smile at each other and be sort of quite, a bit sort of puzzled.
Let's just unpick the cognitive neuroscience, partly because I'm a neuroscience geek and I love it, and partly because I think it's useful because we're talking about everybody. Neuroplasticity is a thing throughout life. I think when I was growing up and being taught neuroscience in the 80s, everybody thought that your brain was static pretty much after 20. And that's so completely not true. Now we know that our prefrontal cortex is only just beginning to come online when we're in our mid 20s. And that by the time we get to our 60s, our pattern matching capacity has changed. So that neuroplasticity is and should be a lifelong thing. And actually, what we're quite good at in Western culture is trying to turn it into something static because that's easier. So you're a neurocoach. I don't really know what that is. Tell us what it is and how you trained. And then let's have a little bit of a deeper dive into the neuroscience of learning as you understand it.
Yes, okay. So I'm a neurocoach, and that came about because as an entrepreneur, I reached that glass ceiling within myself, and I began to feel this real sense that there was something that I didn't yet have a grasp on in terms of how to use my brain to, I guess, achieve the results that I felt were in my grasp. So it was almost like they were always out of grasp. And I met with Dr. Shannon Irvin, who was a neuropsychologist, and basically began working with her to rewire my brain. And it was so powerful because in that process, I began to look at my own negative, automatic negative thinking, so my ants, and realized that my big, strong one was, I can't do this, it's too hard. And so this was my glass ceiling. So every time, but also not only I can't do this, it's too hard. Every time it kind of looked like I might be achieving it, I would pull the brakes again and almost sort of self-sabotage. So I began to feel this huge expansion of my own potential and understand how we can harness our brains now on that neuron level in a totally different way. And I began to see the shift in me, almost that emotional roller coaster that I had just accepted life was about, began to even out. And I didn't have to have the highs and the lows. I didn't have to feel invincible one day and then vulnerable the next. I could actually train my brain to calibrate to a much more aligned, harmonious rhythm, if you like. And because it was so powerful for me, I was like, I need to take this to the parents in my community, because I'd also then realized that actually no matter what we did in my center or what schools do, the real difference is when what happens in the home. So by now I'd started working with parents online, and really seeing that their own glass ceiling, their limiting beliefs were being passed on generations, right? So if they'd got it from their parents, who'd got it from their parents, and they were sort of passing that on. So I began to work with the mothers to rewire their brains, and that's when I began to see something extraordinary happen, because it was like they were stepping into leadership rather than micromanaging, and their children were beginning to create. Their creative energy of their children was being expressed almost without the parent having to do anything. So we're not talking unschooling, we're talking the power of what I call the lights on effect. We're talking brain to brain synchrony. We're talking, when we entrain to into love and joy and gratitude and abundance, that becomes the energetic tone for the whole family. Um, yeah, so
So just tell us a little bit more about the cognitive neuroscience of this. You did a training. Can you tell us a little bit about what training you did and how that panned out? But then can you just say a little bit more about what you see as the science of what's happening and then the energetics of what arises out of that?
yes, sure. So I trained as a master neurocoach. So it was kind of learning how to use the neuroplasticity of our brains to help our clients, in my case, mothers, parents, to be able to identify the neural networks that have become so automatic that we're not even aware we're thinking of them. So sort of 95%, it's said, of our thinking just happens on autopilot. And because we have a negativity bias, a lot of that is like, oh, I can't do this, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not safe, all of these patterns. And what I learned to do was help people identify that. So almost go into your subconscious to see what are the automatic thinking patterns that are running the show. Yeah. And how is that linked to your identity? And how is that impacting your nervous system? And then ultimately, how is that impacting your behavior and how you show up in the world and the results that you get? And it makes sense of those repeating patterns. We always get to just to that point and then never further, for example, or always just make just enough money, but never any more, So so I help them do. And where I've got to now in terms of with the cognitive neuroscience, I talk about our learning circuitry being the heart set, mindset, and skill set. And this is really the heart's intelligence, the power of our minds and the brain's neuroplasticity and our nervous system, all really needing to work together in order for us to really create I call it the energetic signature within our bodies that allow us to truly flourish and to express our creative energy with freedom and flow. Um, and so the way I think about it, I guess, is that we have this incredible human technology that we just don't know how to use. So it's like, I don't know about you, but we buy a washing machine and it has all of these things and you spend a lot of time being told everything it will do, but you always just put it, or I do, always just put it on
Yes.
the
On
the
the
eco
same
wash.
wash. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
and
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
never even think about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit like that with us in our human technology. We have our heart's intelligence, we have our nervous system that will really give us clear signals as to, what we're feeling. And then we can sort of look and go, well, what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah.
And when we get to the thinking, we can really look at, is that serving me? Um,
Right.
and the
And if it's not, I have tools with which to change it. And it seems to me that I mean, you are already scaling this, and I'm really interested to understand how the ripples are going out because this level of emotional intelligence is our birthright. And if you look at what Francis Weller calls initiation cultures around the world, they have this level of emotional intelligence. And our culture has shut it down. And you're opening it up. And you're opening it up at scale. And my feeling is that if this scaled and scaled to the point where all 8 billion of us
yeah.
had our lights on, in your phrase, had our heart set, mindset, skill set alive and alight, and the creativity of that, our world would be transformed in a way that we cannot begin to imagine just now. We would no longer be heading off the edge of species level extinction because because it would not be where our creativity, where our hearts want to go. And so this feels really exciting. So I dragged you off into into that particular rabbit hole. Let's bring us back on track. And you've got your center. I had a quote. There's something I just wanted to read this. This is Ollie, who was 13, and he said, "The person I want to be has never made it into school." And just being aware of that at age 13, I look back at me at age 13, I don't know that I would have had the capacity to express that. And his mum said, everyone focused on what was wrong with Ollie. And then I believe he came into your centre. You don't have to use him as an example, but talk us through the kinds of things that you were doing to help people switch their lights on, parents and their children.
Yeah, well, let's stick with Ollie because he's such a powerful example of a child who was hungry to learn, went into school, and became obvious he wasn't able to necessarily go at the speed that the prescribed curriculum or teachers or educational pathway wanted him to go. And he began to feel stupid. He began to feel what something was wrong with him. But he began to feel that because the adults around him began to go, well, what's wrong with Ollie? Why can't he keep up? Or why can't he do this? Or he seems to be, zoning out. And so he kind of talks about that really being happening at year two. So this is about 6 years old. And I met him in year nine when he was 13. And so if we imagine a child going into school every day with the spotlight on them, we're like, well, what is wrong with you? And then going under investigations with educational psychologists that tell him that he's got slow processing, and he will be able to learn, but never really at the pace of others, and all of this stuff happening, and then his mum feeling like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just do your homework? And so when I met him, and as I always meet them, my first step is to find out, well, what do you love to do? And this is what's exciting is a lot of children really know.
Right. And if they don't,
I
you
talk,
can help them. I think that's important because some kids you put them and it's like, oh my God, this is another question I have to get right. I can feel my little inner 6-year-old would have been like a rabbit in the headlights. That's, I don't know what's the right answer.
yeah.
Because by that age, there was a right answer. And you're able to help parents and children work through to something that feels right for them. Yes?
Yes, exactly. And one of my tools was a learning carousel. And that really came about because as we began working with school groups, the children would arrive in dribs and drabs. We'd have 30 children, say, for example, turn up at my center. And I began realizing, well, I don't really want one of my mentors to have to, for the kids that arrive early, have to sort of step in straight away. And so I used to set up these tinkering stations. So we'd have Lego in one corner, dressing up, in another, some iPads for animations, painting. We'd have all these sort of tinkering stations. And that's when I began to observe, gosh, when the children arrive, they self-select where they want to go and explore. And I began to observe that. And sometimes the children, I would just remember one boy I'm bringing up in my memory, it was a Lego. He would just go there. He had eyes for nothing else but the Lego. Others would explore and go all around, and others would begin to merge the two. Or maybe I'll do a painting and I'll film and time lapse it as I'm doing it. But what I began to realize is that actually, when the children were self-selecting something that they love to do, they didn't need us managing them at all. They didn't need us kind of, sort of like, be quiet now. Everyone was just sort of self-absorbed. And this was obviously in line with all the stuff I'd read about the best pedagogical practices around the world, with project-based learning, real-world learning, and all of that. And so with Ollie, he came into my center and I had an animation station set up. And so he started animating, and I went over and had a look at what he had done, and it was really good. So instantly, so I've only just like met him now. So schools had him for like what, since he was 6 to 13, and he was still feeling a failure. And he was failing academically. Within 5 minutes, I knew, oh, okay, he's a visual creator. That's where we need to focus. And then asking him, well, what do you love to do? Did he know? He did. He loved taking photographs. I said, well, will you bring some in and show me? And it became really clear that he had a really good eye for framing and for telling a story actually in within an image. And that's what I'm always looking for. I'm always looking for like, where does the natural creative expression come easy to us, whatever age? And that's where we begin. And sometimes as an adult, we overlook that. Oh, well, that's easy for me. It's like, brilliant. Let's
Yeah.
bring that
Yeah.
center
Go with
stage.
what feels good. Yes,
Yeah,
because
it
then it
feels
feels easy.
good.
Yes.
And so with Ollie, what was glorious about it was within 12 hours, he was a totally different child. And he started now showing up very differently in the school. I have an interview with the head teacher who talks about he was now looking at her in the eye before he would
Mm.
just try and be invisible. Um, the teachers said he's now participating in the class. And what Ollie got from Lights on Learning and was the discovery of himself back, the discovery that actually there was something that he was good at, that he had the
Mm.
potential to become great at if he focused and explored it and was brave enough to go down dead ends and get things wrong and hit that frustration point that's so important for learning,
Right.
and to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the getting things wrong and the frustration point. I'm particularly thinking of the person who drew the impossible triangle. I can't remember who that was.
Oscar.
But Oscar, tell us a little bit about, I think that's really important is that the frustration point is okay. Because again, I think people try and fight shy of that.
Yes, exactly. And I think the mistake that this generation of parents are making is that when our children get frustrated or angry with learning, they try to appease them and they try to take them out of those emotions to get them back to feeling good again. And actually, what Lights on Learning does is like, oh, brilliant, you've hit your edge. Yeah. And this is the point where you're about to break through and learn. This is the point where the old neural networks that you've got don't serve you anymore. You've got to create and carve and wire in new ones. And so with Oscar, he was 6 years old and he came to our center. Um, and he had been kind of been described by the teachers as lazy. He should be doing better, but he's not really showing up, as he could be. And his parents kind of felt this was out of sync with what they thought of their sparky kid, who was obviously very switched on and capable of extraordinary things. So he came to my center as a Flexi school day. And again, we discovered like, well, what was he really naturally good at? And he loved drawing houses. Now his dad was an architect, so again, no surprises there. I mean, we can literally sometimes join the dots up. But he was obviously very good with his, hand-eye coordination, and his was a skill set that we wanted to develop was the technical drawing. And wanted to use the process, or we were using the process of draft critique as kind of really brought into the educational world by Ron Berger, who was this teacher who really believed that children were capable of excellence. He has an amazing book, The Ethics and of Excellence. And he wanted to bring that sort of craftsmanship back into the classroom. And he has very specific guidelines for critique, which is kind, helpful, and specific. And we used that with Oscar, who was 6 years old, to learn to draw the impossible triangle. And by bringing in the drafts, Oscar was able to go through, he went through, I think it was 5 or 6 drafts before he got to the one where we were all like, wow.
Yeah, there's a picture in the book, and it's a 6-year-old drew that. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
It is amazing. And I think it was when I really discovered the work of Ron Berger and draft critique was when I remember standing up, I was in Canada, standing up and almost declaring, this is why our education system isn't working, because we are accepting the first draft.
Right.
And none of us should ever look at our
Gosh, no.
own work and worth based on our
No,
first draft of
no.
anything.
As an adult, you know this. If you ever read the first draft of my book, I would bury myself. It's dreadful. So, yeah, of course, that's what you do is you iterate and iterate and
Exactly.
iterate. And yes, wow.
Yeah.
And there's a little girl in the book who tell us about
Bryony.
the writing about the dinosaurs. That was gorgeous.
Yeah, so Bryony was another example of a 6-year-old. So again, this is what's exciting about this is 4 or 5 6-year-olds are, are capable of such extraordinary things that our education system, or even sometimes our home education, isn't drawing out of them. But when you know some simple tools, oh my goodness, they will be blown away by what they can achieve. So Bryony was starting to get anxious about going to school. She was what you would could be considered a high achiever. So she would have been in the sort of, that top band within the school. But she was starting to get anxious and complain of stomach aches and not want to go in. And then lockdown happened, luckily for Bryony. And her mum found me and started working with me online. And I said, let's first find out what's making her anxious. And we discovered, again, by simply asking, because like you say, it's the level of self-awareness of our children is actually really high. It's just we never really ask. We make assumptions. Oh, she's got anxiety. Whoa, okay, but there'll be something that's causing that. What is it? And it turns out she felt she was rubbish at writing. And of course, what happens every day when you go to school is you spend 10 minutes in your book writing. And she was tripping herself up because her best friend was sitting there and it was all flowing and she would write like a whole page. And Bryony just got, caught up in this. I'm rubbish. I can't do this. So that same neural network that I discovered when I was, started rewiring my brain, I can't do this. It's too hard. Bryony was already telling herself that I'm rubbish at writing. And so what I love to do is go, okay, great. Well, then it makes sense if you believe that about yourself. It makes sense you'll feel anxious. So there's no problem actually. Your body, your heart, your nervous system, your mind is all working perfectly well to keep you safe. And to keep you safe, you want to avoid doing the thing that makes you feel like that. And so then the next question really was, okay, so you feel you're rubbish at writing. Do you want to get better at it? Because if they say no, we just pause for a bit and we go down a different avenue. But of course she said yes. And so we then started looking at, well, what was she really, what really lit her up? And it was she was a communicator, and she loved learning facts about dinosaurs and space and the universe. And she loved then communicating and sharing that knowledge that she was gaining with her younger brother. So then we gave a brief, which we do with Lights on Learning. We gave a creative brief because what I found was when we give a creative brief that has some parameters and a tangible outcome of creative expression, that's when we begin to see the learning really take on the next level. And then when we bring in draft critique and some other tools and techniques as well. So we gave her a brief to did she want to make a book that she could then give to her younger brother? And she did. And so, what was really exciting about that is then the next step was to help her overcome and move through that fear and that anxiety that she couldn't write. That was her anxiety that she was rubbish. And her mum learned to hold space for her to push on through that frustration. That moment that she wanted to quit, she got to 6 words and she'd agreed to write 10 words and she wanted to give up. It was too hard. And it was like her mum was like, "Can you do one more word?" "Yeah, I can do one more word." "Yeah." And then, do you think you can do another word?" "I can do another word." And that celebration of that post-struggle success when she got to the 10 words, that was the win. And that was the moment that she was able to realize, actually, I think I can't, but it turns out I can.
Yeah,
And that's learning for
right,
me.
right. Yes. And that's also then the cognitive neuroscience again. There's whole circuits of getting to the edge of myself is actually quite exciting because then I can move through,
Yes.
which is huge. So I want to talk about your spectrum of lightness going from darkness to radiance because that feels to me like an incredibly interesting spectrum. I'm also really interested, just in a writer perspective, that you went for pairs of alliteration and you dared to break it at the end. I was thinking last night I would have gone from bright to brilliance, and you went from brilliance to radiance, which is great. So tell us a little bit about that spectrum and about the fact that it's not a binary, it's a spectrum, and that we move across it in a sine wave.
Yes, perfect. Yes, we can sort of move fluidly and dynamically through it all.
Yeah.
Let me go back to then where the whole lights on, lights off came as a first would start with the binary metric. And that was really when I was looking for a way to really know when we as a team were leading children to a place that was, yes, that's it, we've got it. And I had a meeting with a business strategist, and he said, "Well, how do you know when you kind of, when you're there?" And I said, "Well, you see it in their eyes. It's like their lights come on." And he said, "Well, there you go, lights on, lights off." So that was really exciting. That was back in 2016. Because it felt so simple, and children of all ages and adults of all ages understood it. Oh, that moment when you see it in someone's eyes, they light up, and you just can't stop smiling because you're looking at them. But equally, you can see it when they've switched off too. And then when with my community, online community of parents, I asked them if they'd begin tracking because by now I was understanding going beyond the cognitive neuroscience into the heart's intelligence and understanding more about nervous system regulation and also how the neurochemistry and everything. I was kind of going on a deeper sort of journey and realizing that, for us to get into flow, lights on is really important. But for us to really grow, lights off is really important. So I had moved from thinking we want to get as many children into lights on as possible to realizing the importance of being lights off, that actually that's where the hidden potential hangs out. and then the exponential potential hands out in radiance. So I was beginning to understand our human potential and our soul potential on a much greater level. So the parents, I said yes to tracking, and it became really obvious that the binary was just too limiting because we weren't always lights on, and and it felt really depressing to always say we were lights off. So it felt really natural for us to have three, what I've ended up calling signatures, of lights off and three signatures of lights on, so that we had this sort of scale or this spectrum. So from darkness to dimness to glimmer, the three lights off signatures, and then from glow to brilliance to radiance. And what became really powerful, co-creating this with my community, was that not only was it a self-awareness tool that we could see, like, oh, actually, I am lights on, but I'm at glow. So I could go either way. I could step into being lights off, and sort of cascade into glimmer. And I'm not sure I know what radiance feels like for me. So we began to get real sort of minute awareness of how the different emotional and energetic landscapes within our own bodies, so the internal learning environment, felt. And so it's a self-awareness tool. But then Sarah, I could include her quote in the book, said, I realize if I use it as self-awareness, I can just get stuck there, like, oh, I'm at glow, or oh, I'm in dimness. Great that I know it, but okay, I'll just settle here. But she realized, but if I link it to something that I want to achieve that day, and I ask, where do I need to be? Oh, I'm in glow, but this would be so much easier if I got into radiance. Now it becomes a calibration tool. And that's the power of where we are as a community at the moment, is that yes, self-awareness is the first step, but then when we really know how to calibrate and to wear a place that's going to enhance and enrich our experience in the moment or help us achieve something, um, it becomes it just is just such a powerful tool. And sometimes that means hanging out in darkness intentionally, or dimness or glimmer in the lights off spectrum, to really see, go a layer deeper. What's calling my attention? What can I let go of? What's the fear that I'm holding on to? And where am I holding on to it in my body? And that's really when we can enter into the letting go and the surrendering, and the dissolving of past traumas and pains, and heal.
So this feels really rich because this is definitely every human being on the planet, and you have wire, which is witness. Talk me through wire witness. Can't remember the I bit.
Identify, I'm going to have
Identify,
to remember now,
I've
rewire and
got it.
reframe, and then, yeah, I'd probably have to
Witness,
educate.
I've got it here. Witness, identify, reframe, and energize. Because it
Yes.
seems to me that capacity to take inner agency. I meet a lot of adults who could witness and identify and would freeze at the reframing and the energizing of another part would be going, no, it's too hard. I am stuck in darkness and there is no way out.
Mm.
And what you have done is help people to smoothly and presumably without that self-judgment and the, oh God, it's another tick box that I have to tick, shift their inner state. So
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about the process of the reframe and energize? When people have identified, I'm in a dark place. I've got a lot of parts of me that are telling me I'm hopeless and useless and stuck and nothing is going to get better and the world is going off the edge of a cliff and total catastrophe, it's all horrible. And I've identified that. How do you reframe and energize so that we can move back into flow state? Because I was looking for earlier a wonderful quote from Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, and I can't
Yeah.
find it. But he's the flow guy.
Yes,
So
exactly.
if you can tell us a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yes. So once you've identified the thinking, and again, if I go back to I can't do this, it's too hard, which was my big automatic negative thought. Um, I like to kind of go to, where was the first time that you remember thinking that, so that you can see, if you can't get there, it doesn't matter. But for me, what was interesting when I was asked that is I was about 2 or 3 meters up a yew tree. I was 7 years old, and I was trying to jump on a swing, or a rope swing that would take me across a pond. And my dad was up there with me, and my legs were shaking, and I was scared. And I'm going, I can't do this. And he's like, yes, you can, sweetie. I can't. Yes, you can. And we must have been up there for about half an hour. But that was my childhood. It was a very, very physical, riding motorbikes, horses on swings, and my dad was always there, really, as that mentor to push me, I guess, beyond my edges constantly. So I hardwired in, I can't do this, it's too hard. And then it began to show up everywhere. So when you kind of can see the origins of it, and it's not that important, but for me, it instantly was like, oh, it makes sense then. It makes sense that this is there. It's then about looking at for evidence of, well, where has that been the case? And then you've overcome it. So again, if we look at Bryony, we gave her a really good example of 6 years old. I can't write. I'm rubbish at writing. We gave her an experience, a learning experience where she could absolutely refute that, well, that's not entirely true. And all we need to do is find one bit of evidence that, well, actually, that time when you thought you couldn't do it and you did and you kept going and it was really hard and painful, but you did, you emerged out the other side. For us to be able to start dismantling that as a universal truth in our minds. And so once we can see it and go, okay, it can be true, and a lot of the time it is true, but it's not always true.
Right. There's a
Therefore, we can
crack in
have
the armor somewhere.
exactly.
And I'm wondering with adults, because your dad, in the story, he actually did put you on the swing and swing across, and then later you were able to jump. But the I can't do it was still locked in, which I find really interesting. Even the fact that within a day you'd learn to do it, that, oh no, I can't, was in there. So with adults who've lived with, oh gosh, I can't,
Mm.
how do you help them to create a chink in armor that might not otherwise be there?
I guess by looking at it and finding that piece of evidence
Or making
of
the
I
piece of
can do
evidence?
it. So
As an adult, would you do what you did with Emily and go, okay, let's create the evidence? Because I can imagine circumstances in which it would be very hard to find the evidence.
um well, I guess I mean, I haven't yet worked with an adult who hasn't been able to find at some point in their life
Okay.
that moment of
Okay,
celebration
that's
of being
interesting.
able to achieve something.
Something.
So,
Okay.
for
That they wanted
example,
to
so
achieve.
again, if we play with our timelines, we're just looking for something that will allow your brain to start kind of believing it is possible for you to do hard
Okay.
things. Yeah.
Right.
And then sort of we can dive into that, or we can start stacking the evidence. So again, if we can find one piece, that's great, but maybe we can find 10 pieces where
Right.
actually we felt it was really hard and I can't do it, but we did keep doing it.
Right.
Yeah, and part of then a bit further down the line is moving from that sort of very masculine energy of push on through, and brute force to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to kind of dissolve that and create more flow, and feminine energy
Right.
coming in. So we're
Right.
not burning out
Yeah.
to be able to do it. But we're sort of finding that evidence. And then another really powerful part of how I help adults rewire their own brains is to think about their own children, if they're a parent or a child or someone vulnerable, and imagine kind of going up to them and going, well, you can't do this. You'll never be able to do that. Oh, you're so pathetic.
Right.
Like, look at your writing, it's rubbish. And so we externalize the
Yeah.
internal talk that we're saying to ourselves. And I can see your reaction to that.
Yes. No, it's horrible, isn't
Oh,
it? And you have to be really broken to want to do that to a kid.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so when you really realize, like, gosh, I would never do that, and then you realize, but I'm doing that to myself, that also dissolves something because it brings in the
Right.
compassion.
Right. You can begin to have self-empathy and self-compassion,
Exactly.
which is, again, a very hard thing in our culture because it's been trained out of us. Right.
Exactly. And so we
Excellent.
want to find that turning point and that realization of, if you keep believing this and repeating this, on autopilot, you're going to keep feeling the same things. And so once we've got that, then we also can look and go, right, well, what if you heard someone else say that to your child or someone who was vulnerable, what would you come in and say? And of course, it always comes down to like, no, you can do anything that you achieve, if you set your mind to it. and we start stacking the evidence for them. And then the energize part is really tuning into that radiance, tuning into that sense of love, that sense of gratitude, if we can get there. And again, part of the process of learning this is even learning to feel gratitude and to be connected with love. So that's
Yes.
important. But we get to a place where a memory. So I help parents as a thinker, when people would say to me, drop into your heart, I couldn't do it. I didn't really know what it meant. And that inner smile. And so I realized with the inner smile memory, I can use my brain as a thinker to bring a memory up that instantly floods my body with that sense of smiling inside and outside, or love or gratitude. And that was my gateway into being able to um, become a feeler, I guess, which I think is crucial to this work. And really, what we want to do is when we want to create a brain prime that's energized with that emotion. So we might not go from I can't do this, it's too hard to I can totally do this, but we could go I am learning to be able to do hard
And
things.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn, and I'm loving the learning process. I think
Exactly.
one of the many things that was really exciting in your book is within Accidental Gods, we have the three pillars of the heart mind, which are gratitude, compassion, and joyful curiosity. And you haven't named the joyful curiosity, but it's absolutely shining through your book. When lights are on, you have that joyful curiosity of, wow, I wonder what happens next. Yeah, I could do this. I can draw dinosaurs, or I can draw an impossible triangle, or I can build Lego, or I can do lots of your children using iPads to do amazing film work. And that, with the gratitude and the compassion as part of it, is what lets us be heart-led. And it's integral to what you're doing. And you're, without necessarily using the same nomenclature, we got to the same place, which I find fascinating and really encouraging, because again, I think these are the keys to our entire culture growing up. I found the Csikszentmihalyi quote, which I still think is really, really interesting. So he says, this is the person who basically discovered flow states. And he says, if engaging in a passion brings positive effects, are there negative effects of not engaging in a pattern? And they did a study which found that when participants were instructed to remove all sources of flow from their lives for the duration of the study, there were significant impacts on their ability to function mentally. By the end of the first day, participants reported feeling sluggish about their behavior. They began to experience headaches, they had difficulty concentrating and felt either sleepy or too agitated to sleep. And after 48 hours, the general deterioration in mood was so advanced that prolonging the experiment would have been inadvisable. 2 days into restricting flow, and they had to drop their study because they were destroying people. And those headaches and either too sleepy or not able to sleep, how many people in our culture are walking around with that all the time because we've created a system where that flow state of I know what's mine to do and I am doing it to the best of my ability, and I'm surrounded by people who respect me for what I'm doing. And I think that's what Ollie found. He began to be able to look people in the eye because he felt respected because he was doing what he was good at. And that reciprocal respect is so crucial. And you have, with your lights on learning system, found an avenue into that. And you're giving it to parents and children. What really struck me, one of the many things again in your book, was that you're helping parents to find their flow state, to be able to model what it's like to have a flow state for the children. As many of the Ollies and Bryonies as there are in your book, there are also parents, and you've helped them to go out and find what they love to do, and it's always creative. It's making music or drawing or making films or doing a podcast or something. It's not, oh, I just needed to go into the office more.
And I think that's what's really exciting is that when we accept that we are creative beings and that learning is as natural to us as breathing, and that actually it's the blockage of our creative energy that creates our mental ill health or our unhappiness and lack of fulfillment, or even the constant searching and never finding it. And actually, what your work and my work is saying is that return back to self. What am I here to express? And what's my preferred way of expressing it? And that's, I think, for me is the real answer, I guess, I've gifted myself for that 9-year-old that was like, why am I here? There must be something bigger than me. It's, I just believe I'm here to absolutely learn how to be in the resonance of love as often as I can, and to lead myself and others from that place. And I think this is, I think, where, our passions kind of meet, because like you say, imagine then if we could bring more families to that place rather than the baseline of fear and the question of what is wrong with me. And just to pick up on your joyful curiosity, um, I just think curiosity is such a powerful um, opening of a portal for children. Let's find out what they are, and for adults, let's find out what it is we love to do. What are we interested to explore? And what would we push on through, or not even push on through, what would we move on through in terms of obstacles and frustrations and all of those lights off emotions to discover the answers for. And I think that's what we've lost with humanity. I think we think there's a set path that we have to walk on. And I guess I try to be excited about the point that we in history that we find ourselves with everything that's been disrupted, is that it's a chance for us to look and go, actually, what is the reframe for us as human beings? Why are we here, and how do we, survive and safeguard our future for not only this generation, but their next generation and the next generation? And I think the powerful thing about when we really come down to the simplicity of being human, if we can learn to, like you say, lead from that heart space, and then we can learn to harness the power of our thinking to really be able uh, to create from a place of abundance and gratitude and love. And then we can use our fears for growth rather than get stuck in them. It would change how we show up as parents, as educators, as teachers, as employers, as creatives, as artists, as engineers, scientists.
Conscious
And
nodes in the web of life.
yeah.
Yes. So I'm realizing we're heading towards the end of time, but this feels, where do you see us going from here? Because we're clearly, the old system is breaking apart. It's gone. All of the things that we thought when we were younger,
Mm.
the world was going to be for the younger generations, is not a thing anymore. And yet, we are learning for our head minds to be in service to our heart minds rather than our head minds just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
I am thinking you've been doing this nearly 20 years now. There must be young people that you helped to switch their lights on who now have children of their own who are helping them to switch their lights on. That's question one. Is that the case? I'm also thinking that this is a spiritual expansion as much as anything else. And it's also, in the end, the personal is political. It's a political movement in a way. It's saying what we are here for is finding what we're here for. What we're here for is letting our joyful curiosity and gratitude and compassion be why we're here in the world and what we do in the world. And we're recording this 3 days after Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana set up the potential start of a new political party. And it seems to me that what we need is a political movement. And I'm really curious to know how many of the parents and young people that you're with are engaging in changing the communities that they're in, because you started, it must have changed your community to have a circus from the school. It just must. People are engaging in a different level, or a musical, or the amazing tree play that you did. It must have changed the way that people interacted with each other. And that was a long time ago. So, two questions. First of all, what are the next generation of lights on young people being like? And second, what are the politico-spiritual implications of this in the world that you're seeing?
Okay. So in terms of the young people that I would have worked with, what I'm seeing now is that I see a really clear connection between the thing that we help them discover is where they're pursuing their careers. So yeah, so I'm thinking in particular of another Ollie who's just got a job with Foster's Architects, but it was like he loved drawing houses, and so we gave him space to, draw houses, and he drew a picture of the school, and we got that on the wall. So that recognition of where our natural gift is, when we give opportunity to follow that thread, how and that can be weaving with other threads, as you said earlier. It's so beautiful to see where they end up, still with that really lit up. So that's the one thing that Lights on Learning does, is it once that switch is on and once the child can recognize this is the thing that I love to do and it's valued. And actually when I do it, I feel good. And when I feel good, I achieve beyond anything I could imagine. I want to keep myself attached to this and connected to it for life. So that's the power of Lights on Learning for the trajectory. In terms of a spiritual and political movement, the vision that I have is, as a social entrepreneur, I want this to ripple out throughout the world. But I'm also very conscious about, I don't want to build a big corporation. Those days I feel are over, right? Or I'd like them to be. And so what I'm looking at is this idea of a social franchise model where the mothers who have come through, we have what we call sparkies, which are the mothers who have come in and transformed to such a level that they want to give back. They were like, I want to lead a group of women to feel like this and to walk this path from really not knowing how to lead her family to inspiring and switching on the whole potential of her whole family. And so what I see is that our sparkies become the sparks within their own community. And that then feels limitless because we're then, each Sparky could have their community of 100 or 1,000 families. And then from that community could be a few Sparkies that might go and
Exactly.
set up
This is
theirs.
how exponential growth happens. And it's all around the
Exactly.
world because we're online now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's exciting about that, and I can really feel it as a vision, is we're not compromising our values as a business by suddenly becoming so big that we become part of the problem. But we are enabling through the entrepreneurial energy, which I love, and creative energy, the 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 power of Lights On to spread exponentially, as you say. And that would be sort of the political, like how can we do business differently? Yeah, with real values at the heart of it and community led and passion and really strong core of ethics that we are a business to serve humanity. So that would be one thing. And then the other, from a spiritual perspective, I really see once we get mothers or families connected to the radiance, that for me feels like the gateway to the spiritual growth. It's really beautiful to see the parents go from sort of being quite hard with this wall up to this softening and opening and become much more consciously aware of who they are and how their own energetics impacts their family. They see evidence of it. They start getting affirmation back and they start then using their own gifts for small businesses or for a podcast or to make music, like you said, to create their own expression. Um, and that for me is where it fits in with the being able to bring more and more people into that conscious awareness through a model that can guide them to their own radiance. Because once they open up to radiance, then they're already there. The portal is open to more spiritual growth, but without alienating the people who aren't yet ready for some of the conversations that we have at that sort of higher level of awareness or consciousness. Um, so I really hope that through this social franchising model, through more and more parents believing that actually, whether the system is broken or not, I choose to not be part of that narrative because it's not helpful for me. And actually, it just holds that narrative in place rather than dissolves it. And I choose to be a parent that learns to live and lead my family in a different way. And by doing so, my true purpose is here to give back and for not only for my family, but for my community and for families all around the world. So that's the big vision.
That's a pretty amazing vision. I so hope it works. So how do people who want to engage with you, I'll put your website, lightsonuniverse.com, into the show notes. Is there any other way you would like people to connect with you?
Yes, you can find me at the Lights on Mum across the socials on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And yes, I'm sort of hanging out there, and um, I've got uh, I've got a scorecard and a free mini course that you can again find from my website. But what that does is it just helps you make that first shift as a parent. If you're listening to this as a parent, to thinking there's something wrong with my child, to realizing no, there's nothing wrong with our children. They're beautiful just as they are. But and are you ready to step into leadership of yourself and your family? So, and then I've got a free mini course that really helps us really look at disengagement isn't a problem at all. It's the biggest gift that we could harness right now with where the future of humanity is going.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Right. I will put everything that I can find into the show notes. And it feels to me, whether people have children or not, this is something definitely to engage with because we all hit that moment of disengagement. And you have a really flowing way of moving through it that isn't sit on a meditation cushion for 10 hours a day, or you have to go and sit in the hill. I am guessing that when people get to Radiance, they are naturally more connected to the web of life and the natural world outside the room. But it's not where it starts, which I think for a lot of
Yeah.
people is going to be really useful. So,
Thank you.
Julia Black, thank you so much for coming on to the Accidental Gods website. I can feel that there will be another conversation at some point, in probably about 6 months to a year. We'll come back and see where you've got to because I think it'll be really exciting. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.